Yeah. We just read mail too.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The agenda is set. We have a short consent agenda, unusual for workshops but not unheard of, so I will let the city manager go through the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor, Pro Tem, and members of council. You have two consent items tonight. The first one is item B1, which is the Minnie Brooks Act exemption for the fire station studies. This item was budgeted for this fiscal year, and what this waiver request is doing, or exemption request, is to waive our RFQ process and just go directly to the actual firm. And so state law allows that, and the request is to waive that Minnie Brooks Act for the North Belmont area fire station study and the main fire station study. Item B2 is South Point High School's pyrotechnic display and associated fee waiver request. You can see that South Point High School has a home game on September the 12th, and they are planning a post-game fireworks display for the Patriotism Bowl, and that recognizes our nation's military service members and first responders. Based on our 25-26 year fee schedule, you can see that there are various costs associated with the fireworks display. The total amount for all those added together is $1,115. Also included is the athletic director, Coach Hyde's request to me to place this on the agenda. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, and I believe the contractor for the fireworks is not the same contractor that was in charge of the fireworks at Red, White, and Belmont.
That's correct.
That's what they are, we're getting free.
Yes. Any questions about any items on the consent agenda? All right, if there are no questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Alex, seconded by Charlie. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. That leads us to our regular agenda for today's workshop. First, we have item C1, North Carolina Legislature update, Hager Strategic Solutions, and we have our lobbyist, Mike Hager, to present an update.
Mayor, Council, thank you guys for having me in today. I always appreciate you inviting me. It's always a great job. I want to just give a quick overview of the legislature this year, give you some numbers. About 1,800 bills were drafted, 1,100 Republican, 700 Democrat bills. Less than 75 actually made it to the governor, which is astounding with that ratio. Of those, the governor vetoed 14, 8 have been overridden, 6 are waiting to be overridden, some of them won't be, but 2 or 3 of those will be. Concealed constitutional carry probably will not be overridden. I don't know if that's a concern of you and law enforcement here. You guys know no budget, no formal budget this year. There's a continuing resolution in the legislature allows it not to have a budget. It just picks up what you had on the last year. Not all the ones last year, just multi-year items, not single-year items. They did do a mini budget last month, which basically were healthcare related, a little bit of education related, but mostly healthcare related. 2 disaster relief recovery bills that Miles and I have worked with to see how it relates to you guys, since you are in the area. Then a German resolution, but there are 2 areas of concern that I'd like to mention to you guys. It may not be of concern, but I think they are to the general population. One is Medicaid expansion dollars. We're worried that when the Fed quits paying 100%, it's built into the expansion piece that North Carolina will not pay either. That's about 600,000 people off the Medicaid rolls if that happens. Mental health, what's called mental health rebates dollars, which is the same situation. This, I think you guys have partners here. This will affect them and their ability to support mental health folks in your area. About $300 million short, so there's going to be some policy folks that are going to not take Medicaid anymore. Some of their folks that deliver services for them. German resolution allows them to come back once a month for 2 days every month. Some months they'll be back, and some months they won't. The first one's coming up next week. Is the 26th and 27th. Probably skeletal unless they can come up with enough folks to override a couple of vetoes, the House. I think they're going back on the 22nd of September. There's some resolutions they got to handle, and there's some other things. They're still any bill that passed the House and passed the Senate prior to, crossover is still alive for the rest of the session. So they'll go back on the 22nd, they'll go back on, October 21st, November 18th, December 16th, and then January, there's dates in January, dates in February, and then they'll start the short session in April 21st. So being that there's been no budget done, there's no, what we call member money. You guys might know what that is, that's what you guys get, is the member money. Once the budget, if it does get rolled out in full, then the member money will be rolled out with it. I feel pretty confident that Representative Torbett, Representative Loftus, and Senator Overcash have our concerns, they've all agreed to them. So if there's member money, that's when we'll see some of that. So they have our priorities.
It won't be before next year.
It could be before, it could be either one of these dates on the 22nd or every day. Those bills that made it over, crossover, are eligible to be considered these dates between now and the end of the year.
So these bills that come up a couple times a month, I think you said.
Yeah, be
Those
2 months,
can-
2 days a month.
Those can include member projects in there?
Yes, that's it. They can, if they want to put more, if they want to do more of a formal budget, and include some of these bills that we've got out there, plus some of the asks that we've had from Corbett and Overcash in the office. So it's still a possibility. And they're still alive for the next budget session. This is the second year in a row, I think, they've not had a budget. So it seems to be the way of the world with the federal and state folks, unfortunately. So we've got to think of another process. Any questions? I'm short and sweet, but
Sounds like a lot of the reason for the impasse so far has been, I know the Senate's pushing for additional tax reductions, right?
yes, yes.
Whereas the House,
The difference in the House and Senate, that's one element, they're pushing for additional reductions on the corporate and the personal income tax. The House wants to actually build higher triggers in there and save more money, because we see a shortfall coming up in the next few years, so we want to kind of pad the rainy day fund to make sure we have it. Plus, there's more money going to Western North County also, is that an issue. And the other issue is medical marijuana. The rules chair in the Senate has decided to keep all the House bills in the House rule, in the Senate rules, until he gets what he wants on medical marijuana. So that's been a big issue. He's just tagging on everything that's in the
who is doing that?
Reagan, Senator Reagan, out of Southport.
So what's his position?
He's the Senate rules chairman. He's probably right on the burger as far as being powerful in the Senate. Yeah, so he does Berger's bidding, but this is his big issue. He's made the statement that once he gets medical marijuana passed, he's going to retire to Idaho. So he may be there a while.
Just don't leave us home.
The House, I won't say ever, but they've had a hard time getting the idea of medical marijuana through the House. So the House is holding that up. And then because of that, Senator Reagan's holding up all the House bills. Again, 1,800 bills were drafted, probably less than 50 made it through the bill. And of those, again, 1,400 detailed, so use those ratios. So not a lot going on.
So then, with that being said, what kind of confidence level do you have that, like, for instance, if some of these member projects are built into some of these bills that may be coming out over the next 2-3 months? I mean, nothing's gonna get passed?
Most of the member projects will come out in the budget, if they decide to get together with a budget.
Next year.
No, they could do a budget this year also. They still have time to do it, they'll meet on it, they're still meeting on it. What they call the big chairs, which are the big chairs in the Senate Finance, and the big chairs in the House Finance are still meeting and trying to come up with an idea of tax reductions, how much more you save, so you can actually add the rest of the projects on there. So it's not dead, nothing's dead until this next session starts. Of course, then they'll start the bills all over, they'll start all the process start all over again. So I'll never say never, but
But is it a pretty probably low probability? Because if I remember last time we went up there, they were saying member projects were probably not gonna happen within this budget cycle.
if they have a budget,
No,
that's just, if they decide to do a budget between now and December,
yeah.
the member projects will be included.
Okay.
If they don't, then they won't.
Other than optically, is there any other motivation for them to get a budget done this year?
And there's no motivation, there's less motivation for the Senate.
Or is there incentives, probably
Yeah,
right word?
there's less motivation and incentives for the Senate because their big issue is tax reduction. And they've got tax reduction built into the continuing resolution. So if they get no budget, they still have some tax reduction. So the House needs a new budget to put more money in the rainy day fund. And there's difference on teacher raises, there's difference on a little bit of everything. But those are differences that will come. The tax reduction issue is a really big issue. So you're right about that. So if they come to grips on that, you've got a little bit of a new, House Speaker flexing his muscle a little bit, he don't want to look weak, of course. And part of the problem also is Berger is in, Senate Pro Tem is in a tough primary, so he's got to be careful what he passes. For instance, I'll give you a good example. The key drivers to getting more tax reductions, getting more revenue. The only thing that drives the revenue they need are things they don't want. They do lottery terminals and horse racing, probably a little bit of issues. Well, the Senate right now don't want to touch those because Berger's got a primary coming up. Berger got in trouble with casinos last year. That's what driving his primary now. So he didn't want to touch any of those to drive more revenue, so there's not the revenue there to reduce the taxes, hence we get the standoff. In politics, or
Just kidding.
sure you gonna run for house? Or
I'm
Senate?
only running to my house.
Good question, but I appreciate it. Any other questions?
Has there been any updates in regards to some of the zoning legislation that we discussed?
765 particularly, maybe talking, if you remember that bill, it's not going anywhere, it got sequestered, we kind of locked that thing up. So right now, nothing's happening on that level at all that I know of.
So I can't remember where we were either, Alex, but there was talk that I know there were 2 or 3 bills to pull out that extract that down zoning language. Did that happen?
No, they have not.
So it's still kind of as it was in
Yes.
January?
Still as it was in January, no, there's been no movement on that. 765, Ron, if you remember, a home builders bill, had some of that language in it. And they did that language as a kind of to mediate that bill a little bit. But it was pretty hard on the other end for you guys, so we stopped that for all that. And that's sequestered in our House rules right now, I believe. That's where all the bills go to die.
Yeah.
All the bad bills. In fact, we don't like them, they're bad bills.
I know one in particular.
Yeah.
Is there any rhyme or reason over the next, what do we got, September, October,
About 4 months.
those couple of meetings that happen in each of those months, like infrastructure bills, are they considered in any particular order, or?
No, there's two constraints that you need to look at. A, you didn't make crossover at a certain date. If you did make crossover, you need to have either a financial or appropriations piece of it. The ones that made crossover are still eligible. Those are in conference in the fact that if I would explain, I apologize, but some folks don't know. If a bill crosses over, or a House bill crosses over to the Senate does what they want to do and they add something to it. When they send it back to the House, it has to go to conference. If there's any bills in conference, you can add anything to those bills you want to add to it. If it's an infrastructure bill, they can add anything you want to add to it. And then pass them out under the agenda resolution. So yes, some of those are still active. We just have to be watching just to make sure something doesn't sneak in that the town doesn't like. So we have to keep watching a lot of some of those infrastructure bills. Down zoning we've been working on, the league's been working on those also, trying to get that fixed. And the Senate has said, yes, we want to fix it, but we haven't seen them make any movement on it yet. And they're the ones that pushed it initially. The numbers, the ones I've seen limit the it still has down zoning that limits the population to anything above either 100 or 200,000, I can't remember. So it really affects the larger cities instead of the smaller cities, which I think would probably be amenable to you guys. That's kind of what we were pushing. If we're going to move it, then that's what it has to look like. Right. So then they'll affect the Charlottes, the Raleighs, and those places. That's really what started all this. Greensboro and Salem did something that one senator didn't like.
Or Durham.
Durham,
Cary.
Durham, Cary, around there. Yeah. So that started this whole thing and just made it, so, again, make it, you put a population limit on what we're pushing for. So you guys would know what's out there. Yeah, because some of the things that are considered now, you may not want on Main Street, for instance. I mean, that's, of course.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, that item was for information only. So we will move on to item C2, turbidity monitoring for construction activities. The latest chapter in the seemingly never-ending saga that we have discussed on multiple occasions in the past. We have our city engineer Kate Goodman here. There will be a staff presentation. I believe there will be a presentation from the county, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and then there are other groups here as well, and so we will have an information gathering session, and we shall see what there is to see.
Yeah, we have, the county to speak about their erosion control program, and then I've also invited the Catawba River Keeper and Lake Wiley Marine Commission, to provide any feedback or, comment on the topic. Yeah, as you said, it's a continued discussion, kind of a recap. There was some concerns from the public and these two associations I just mentioned about the sedimentation and some of our larger bodies of water, like Catawba, Lake Wiley, and South Fork, on erosion and sedimentation and just high turbidity that's visible. We've had some issues with some different public infrastructure, private infrastructure, and concerns all around about sedimentation and erosion. We presented some revisions and updates to the stormwater and the watershed protection ordinance, and those were changed and adopted back in March and April. The stormwater ordinance revisions did include some additional erosion control measures that would help prevent some erosion. We do not have our own local ordinance, so that is administered by the county, Gaston County, but we did add some increased buffers, increased widths, and keeping the vegetation, as well as some of the super silt fence, sediment basin sizing, on those areas that abut the South Fork, Lake Wiley, Catawba, and also disturb larger areas such as 20 acres or more.
When you say no local ordinance, it's no local erosion control ordinance?
Right, so we don't have our own program that's, we would have to get that administered and approved by the state. We would have to have our own certified inspectors and review the erosion control plans and issue the actual permits, and that would allow us to then enforce it and then issue violations and fines and that kind of thing. So Gaston County handles all that for us right now, and they're delegated by the state through their own ordinance. So previously, we did require some turbidity monitors on conditional rezoning, such as Carolina Riverside. That one's been under construction for quite a while, like 8 years or so. And then the Lakeview Farms, which is upcoming, we rezoned that one. We're requiring monitors as well, but either one of those, there was no thresholds or limits set on the turbidity, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because that was kind of one of the questions we left with last time I presented, was like, what is the threshold and how is it enforceable? And then I presented some background on turbidity in May at a workshop. I didn't recommend adding this to our ordinance because we don't review or permit or enforce the erosion control, because Gaston County is our permitting authority. But there was some additional questions and concerns about sedimentation and turbidity, so I was following up with some additional parties on those questions. Trying to establish thresholds, that was one of the issues, so I have some data from like the EPA, the City of Charlotte, Met County. We also obtained Carolina Riverside's turbidity data from the past 5 years, I believe is what they gave me, so I downloaded that. I think you all received a copy of that as well. And I'll have a few of those slides in here to kind of give you a background on how we interpret that data. And also maybe talk about alternative preventative measures other than the monitoring, because we talked a lot about last time about how it's more of a reactive measure. Once the erosion and the sedimentation is in the lakes and the rivers, there's no way to get it back. So trying to educate the design engineers and the contractors and work with Gaston County to implement some more preventative measures to keep it from getting there. And then we'll hear from Gaston County on their program and enforcement and some of the alternative recommendations. So, in talking with the City of Charlotte and the erosion control administrator there, they informed me that there was situation in 2010 where the EPA set a turbidity limit on construction sites that were 10 acres and greater, and that turbidity limit was 280 NTUs, so that was nationwide, but it only applied for storm events under a 2-year occurrence, so that amounts to about 3 inches of rainfall and maybe 12 to 24 hours. Kind of gives you like an idea of how much rainfall is. It's pretty significant. And grab samples was kind of the format of that sampling. So it's not a continuous automated monitor. It's somebody going out with, a beaker and taking the sample and going back to the lab and then interpreting that data and doing calculations and measurements to see what the turbidity is. And those were usually on the site, maybe upstream of the construction activities, and then directly downstream of maybe a sediment basin or at the headwater of a stream. And then in 2013, there was a settlement and litigation that occurred between the EPA and the Wisconsin Builders Association and the National Association of Home Builders, where they overturned this ruling and said that it was hard to establish any nationwide turbidity limit because geographic constraints. I mean, there's different soil types all over the country, different soils settle differently, and it's hard to say, all over the country, 1 NTU is the standard throughout. So they repealed or overturned that ruling, and they took that out of a requirement. So there was no numeric limitation, I guess. And so they challenged the permit, and they removed that from any of the requirements. And then some more feedback from the city of Charlotte. They do have this in their ordinance, and we touched on this last time I presented. This is for both the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. It's in the critical, they have a critical and protected watershed district, kind of similar to what we have. And I'll have a map of that on the next slide, but basically, if there is a site that deserves 10 acres or more, they do have the ability to require turbidity measurements, but this also could be grab samples. And that might be triggered by rainfall events. They want it to be on the site, upstream of the basin, and then directly downstream of the basin, like the sediment basin, not really in a large body of water. But we talked a lot about that in our last presentation about how turbidity can be caused by backwater and large bodies of water. You can't really pin the turbidity on one construction site if it's in a larger body of water. You want it to be really close to that site. So at the headwater or right at the outfall of their sediment basin, so you can be more specific and more specific with who's causing that turbidity.
What's the asterisk for?
I don't know. I have to go back and look at their full ordinance. I'll probably have a copy of that I can send you. But this might give you a little bit more background. But that's their map. So everything on the western side of Mecklenburg County is their critical. And that's kind of what's abutting the Catawba River and Lake Wiley. So we're over there to the west of that area. And I spoke to the administrator there of the erosion control program. He's got about 20 years of experience reviewing and permitting and, enforcing, inspecting erosion control measures across the city. He stated around 300 to 1,000 NTUs is like the typical turbidity of a construction site. 1,000 is extremely high, but EPA's guideline of 280, it's a good baseline.
But it's been withdrawn.
Correct.
Okay.
And they don't issue violations on turbidity. So there's no direct enforcement on the turbidity readings, whether it's autonomous or grab samples, but it does give them indicators. So no site is perfect. There's always a risk of sedimentation when you do construction. It's just an indicator, so if they were to get a reading, then they go out and inspect it. They say, okay, where's the problem occurring, and what can we do to remediate it? Is there blowed out silt fence? Is there setup basin not functioning? Is there clogged? You know, so then they can repair it, or there's other measures that they could, implement to reduce the sedimentation in that one spot.
But like you said, is once they figure that out, it's already happened.
Correct. Like I said, he has about 20 years of experience, and he didn't feel comfortable reading and reviewing and interpreting turbidity data. He did say that, the site is at the headwater, so that's, the top of the stream, the top of the watershed. It's gonna be more impactful when they release erosion and sedimentation. Because if you are taking those measurements further downstream, it's just a less of a measurable impact because the water body is larger. So there's gonna be like more contributions to sediment, in like South Fork, for example. This continued from more City of Charlotte feedback. Basically, if you're gonna get sampling, you wanna get it in a cove, so you're only getting effluent, which is the runoff from that one site, and you're not getting that backwater. So when we have those large storm events, the big rivers rise, they do push sediment and water back into coves. That's just a natural reaction for streams, and then in rivers, especially in a reservoir situation. He did not recommend turbidity monitoring in South Fork, so it's always going to be higher than most rivers.
Why?
I don't know.
That's just what he said.
He's the expert.
They rarely do not require turbidity sampling anymore unless there's like a reoccurring problem at some of these sites, some of these construction sites in the critical areas. And we kind of talked about the cost of it a little bit, and I think Carolina Riverside had stated that they paid about $70,000 a year for these monitors and reporting. And he just was saying, that may be money better spent on some sort of in lieu of fee that we could then apply to like a stream restoration project to stabilize stream banks and help reduce erosion, whether it's citywide, countywide. I mean, that was just his recommendation. And we'll talk about the cost a little bit more, because that cost that was given to me, by Carolina Riverside, we have some different costs that the actual manufacturer of the devices that they got those from gave me some different numbers, so we'll go over that in a minute, but.
What would be the legal basis for charging a payment and lieu fee? We'd have to change the ordinance, wouldn't we?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Mecklenburg County, this is so different. They're in the same county, City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg, they don't really, there's a lot of differences there. They stated that the NTU threshold they use is 50, because that's a state standard. It's 25 for a lake, 50 for a stream. So that's a lot different than like what the EPA and the City of Charlotte stated. It's kind of the same thing. They will receive an alert or a high turbidity reading, and they'll send an erosion control inspector out and then see what the problem is. It's just a warning system basically, and that way they can then go find a corrective action or document a violation that they can then fine them for, and they typically don't enforce and fine anyone based on just the turbidity reading alone.
So they may document a violation or require corrective actions, but they don't typically require corrective actions.
I mean, if they get an alert, they're going out there.
It might alert them to other violations.
Yeah, and they'll go see if there's like blown out measures that were required and supposed to be in place and functional per the plan and per the permit.
Okay.
Yeah. This was in one of their reports from their turbidity monitoring for one of the, this site was actually in the eastern area of Mecklenburg County, so it's not like top of the river, but you can see in the blue is rainfall. So they got some pretty heavy rainfalls a few times this month. This was in early 2024. And the turbidity is in black, and that stayed high, almost above their 50 NTU threshold, pretty much that entire month. And I kind of reiterated that in our last presentation, was just that we have clay soils, they settle in like 2 weeks, it takes a long time. Get those back-to-back rain events, and your turbidity is gonna be pretty much high like that whole month, above their baseline. And then also they provided some feedback about some of the violations that required dredging. NCDEQ was alerted to a few instances in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County area where the state actually required dredging after the fact, but according to the city of Charlotte, there was no actual like legal enforceable or finable action that required them to do so, and they could have refused.
All right. So I'm.
They did it anyways.
So is it I'm just.
Yeah, that's a little.
All right. So the state required dredging after the fact, but there was no legal enforceable or final action that required. So
I guess like legally they could have refused, but they came out and said, yeah, you unloaded so many cubic yards of sediment in this river, and we would like you to remove it.
So like a strongly worded letter.
Yeah, probably could find them maybe, but I don't know if they could have forced them to dredge it, I guess, is what they said. And this was, I wanna say, one of them was down there by the Palisades.
If you get one of these warnings from the devices and they go out to visit the site, are there any other like obvious metrics or things that short of, it sounds like there's no legal basis for finding them, but are there any other obvious indicators or, it's probably the wrong word, but measures that are supposed to be in place to mitigate sedimentation that once you're on site would be obvious,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
such as?
Blown out silt fence, like a clogged skimmer or outlet pipe, the ditches that they were supposed to have installed and matted, stabilization, that kind of thing. And Gaston County will get more into detail about that, but it's, I think, pretty obvious. I think the problem is, with like Carolina Riverside, we required those monitors, well, I don't know if we required them, but they put them in the South Fork, so that's not really a good indicator of turbidity they're causing.
They're always
not-
high.
Yeah, it's like not close enough to their specific outfalls at each phase, I would say. Like we should have had those a lot closer to the actual land disturbing areas. And I have, the next slide is their monitoring. This is the north monitor, so if you drive over the Armstrong Ford Bridge, you can see it. If you look to the right, you're heading towards Belmont. You're going, I guess, northeastern. You can see it there, has a solar panel, it's right there on the South Fork. This was from April 2024 till the end of June. And again, the rainfall's in blue. There was some large storm events, like almost up to 4 inches at one point. But you can see the turbidity was pretty high in like 600 range. And that's the turbidity coming into that area. So it wasn't caused by Carolina Riverside. It was, the waters were turbid when they got there. So this was supposed to, the goal was to put one north of the site and say, okay, well, this is the turbidity before it gets to this point, and then we put one to the south or downstream of the site, and then we look at the delta and say, okay, like, did they cause an increase in turbidity between those 2 points? Because that way we could maybe have a measurable data or measurable increase.
And then the red is the county threshold.
Yeah, it's at the 50, yeah, in the state.
And on the left, I don't know what you call that,
The left axis on the
yeah,
screen.
yeah, so the left axis, so those are the NTUs.
Yep.
So even when it was at its highest, though, it's slightly less than 600, and you said the normal range for construction activity is between 300 and
Yeah,
1,000.
the EPA was like 280, so yeah.
Mhm.
1,000's probably over,
Yes.
too high, that's not ideal. But with a construction site, you're gonna have some turbidity.
So is it normal to see, so looking at this, there's obvious rain events that happened pretty much toward the end of May there, but the turbidity didn't spike along with those rain events. Is that normal?
This is last year.
It's just hard to say, like, it's hard to interpret this data
kick up the turbidity, but it looks like it didn't.
We spiked it on the south side,
Right.
but not on the north.
Yeah.
Right.
Just didn't know if it was if you knew of a
And I
cause for
mean,
that.
I'm also gonna just say that these monitors, they're supposed to be calibrated every 3 months. And there could be some,
Some bad.
and these, there's a lot of bad data, honestly. I tried to find two batches of good data from a north and a south so that we could compare apples to apples, honestly. There's a lot of readings, I was like, "Look, this can't be right, because there was no rain, so I had to compare it to the rainfall events. And it was high, so I knew that something was off. So some of it can be a little subjective and maybe I'm not correct, but yeah, I mean, it was pretty low. You're gonna see the next one, and this is the same month, same rainfall, so the rainfall's the same, but on the left, the turbidity axis looks different because it never got that high, it never got above 50. It's actually, the top red line is 50, and this is the south monitor. So it actually never got above 50, and that might just be because the river widened and a lot of it settled out and maybe settled away from this particular monitor. It's further down below the site. So again, like, it's just hard to interpret the data.
So it kind of goes back to your point of being location specific.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great place.
And then, so the monitoring, one of the questions last time, I think it was about the cost.
Just real quick on the charts though, yeah, I see where it stops at June 24th, 2024. Did we not have any more recent data?
Oh yeah, we have more.
Is that-
We had data before.
This was the best looking comparison.
I have, actually, I have printed out 2025. I only got, so I have basically the beginning of 2025 through about June is when they submitted this. And the northern monitor, we had a 1-inch rainfall in March and a 1.5-inch rainfall in May. And the turbidity for the northern monitor hit 11,000. And that one actually looks pretty good, like, it didn't look crazy, so I'm thinking the monitor was functioning correctly. It went back down after the rain event, but it was very, very high.
But that was the north one you said?
Yeah, so that's what's coming in from,
Bremerton.
yeah. And then for the southern monitor, this one looked kinda maybe not as accurate, maybe needed calibration. It was up in the 3,000s, but it didn't correlate with rain events. So it was like really high and then it went down maybe to like 250. But the graph itself just made me think it needed calibration. So I didn't want to present that particular set of data, but
But in any other sort of data set, if you see a spike in turbidity without a rain event, wouldn't that indicate that there's probably a pretty severe violation going on? Or?
I mean, if you're not having rain, then
Right.
my interpretation is something's wrong with the monitor. I mean, you can have a rain event and then turbidity might happen a couple days later, but it should be pretty
What's the
close.
scope of the rain event? Like, what's the mileage or radius from where these are being done? Because if you think about the rivers, they're coming from up towards the mountain. So if there's a rain event up there, it'll come down. Is the rain event chart including, like,
This
rain events
is-
up in the mountains?
This rain event is from the rain gauge in Cramerton,
So
like, so directly upstream.
potentially not, right?
I mean, yeah, you could get rain events in the mountains and then it not rain here at all,
Yeah.
and then you're seeing that come down days, a week later, yeah. I mean, it's a,
Which might explain the higher sediment in that particular area, even though it didn't have a high.
correct.
I mean, I'm assuming, I'm not
Yeah,
professional at this.
yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's hard to like, hard to compare the data. I'll just pull the rain data right there for the extras from these monitors. So yeah, it's a lot, but, we talked about that, so I'll go back. The cost was a concern or a question, and, a company in Pennsylvania is leasing the 2 devices at Carolina Riverside called Field Data Solutions, and I have quotes from them. So basically, the cost of one monitor is about $20,000. The installation's around $3,000. So that's something that we would have a developer pay up front, $23,000 to have it installed. If this is something that we want to implement potentially. And then there's,
Sorry, Kate, did you say that was a lease?
monitors, 23,000 with the installation, so that'll be an upfront cost. And then we have, basically like cellular communication device, like a modem. There's also some cables and solar panel type equipment. So monthly, the cost would be around $223 to operate it and have it calibrated. You calibrate it about every 3 months, but I've multiplied that times 4 and then divided by 12, so that I can get like a monthly cost. So
200 and, what did you say it was 200?
223, and I've printed about 4 copies of this out, so I can give those to you too. The calibration will be about $165 a month, if you broke it down by month, but it's every 3 months. And then, yeah, the communication piece, that's with the calibration, that's $223. So the modem is only about 16 something, and then that's a rental. So the communication pieces are rentals. Yeah, so the city of Belmont could potentially be paying for the monthly fees, the $223, to keep it going after construction, if this is something that we wanted to keep online, and then have it link up to the city of Charlotte or Mecklenburg County CMAN system. I did talk with them about that, and they potentially would charge us like a hosting fee to have that data transmitted to their website, to have it readily available to us, and provide alerts to us. They did not give me a cost for that, and that might be something they'll give me at a later date. But the Catawba River Keeper said that they could provide the calibration services if we funded it. So that's something that we could potentially partner on if you wanted to pursue this. But yeah, the installation would be developer and the monitor itself would be the developer, I guess. Something like that.
No, you mentioned earlier that Charlotte's policy is they leave it up to the individual jurisdictions, municipalities, I believe, to determine whether they want to monitor or not. Were you able to determine if there were any of their Mecklenburg municipalities that are currently monitoring?
Mecklenburg County has,
Any of the towns within the.
well, Huntersville has their own erosion control program, but the city of Charlotte basically ministers their own erosion control for all the other areas within the city limits, and the Met County handles everything outside of that.
Okay.
So,
But there's no additional enforcement measures or monitoring measures over and above what the county does and as outlined.
no, there's not. And like I said, it's kind of at the discretion, based on the project and the size, they could require humidity monitoring or not, but it's gonna most likely be by graph sampling. The River District, I believe, did partner with Mecklenburg County, and they installed 2 autonomous monitors to monitor that project, and that's something that'll probably be built for like 20
10-year
years.
build-out.
Yeah. So they started the roads maybe a year or 2 ago. They were working on that, so.
So on your slide, you have maintenance and then calibration.
Yeah, it's mainly, that's what it is, it's this calibration.
How often do these things break?
I don't know, he just said every 3 months is the recommendation that they go out there and check it and calibrate it.
Well, I'm talking about like something on it breaks off or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, people can mess with them too, they're gonna be kind of at remote locations. They'll have a solar panel on them most likely, and
Seems like the technology is quite there, it's paying $20,000 for people's equipment, it's got to be calibrated every 3 months.
yeah.
It's sitting in a river.
Yeah, and then, I mean, at some point, maybe like 5-10 years, there'll be technology upgrades, like we want to get like a new one, just because it's outdated or something, it might not work with software or something like that, maybe 10 years or something, I don't know.
Where is it currently located, out in the middle of the river, or
It's on the bank,
it is on that?
yeah. I drove over there, I guess it was this past week, when we got those heavy rains, and you couldn't even see it anymore, I think it was like underwater. Probably.
To my point, like, I feel like these things are gonna break off.
Yeah, it really should be more of a code, I think, so. Kind of talk a little bit about some of the other proactive measures we touched on a little bit last time, but some additional things is maybe like limiting retaining stone walls at some of these projects, which makes it difficult to construct and manage the erosion, and Gaston County will probably talk a bit more about that. And then maybe like limiting how much area that we're allowing to be disturbed. That would require some really accurate cut and fill calculations by the design engineer and the contractor. I think that was one of the problems that ran into it, like Carolina Riverside, was that their calculations were a bit off, so then they had to go steal dirt from other places, and they started disturbing more land than they anticipated. Maybe 20 acres is something that City of Charlotte uses, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. But we could put a restriction on that as long as they can provide pretty good maps and calculations that their site's gonna balance, and that way they don't have to go, start future phases before they need to. We added the buffers to the ordinance, increased buffers. We added buffers for like intermittent perennial streams. We really didn't have that requirement before. So something additional we could do is just require jurisdictional determinations on all the waterways that we come across on our projects. Some of these ordinances, the way they're written is you look at like a USGS map, and if it's a blue line, then that's a stream, and that's where the buffers come in. But a lot of those maps are outdated. And so there's a lot more jurisdictional streams than we think. So it's something that we could require to then establish more buffer requirements, to then have more undisturbed buffers. And that really helps filter and catch the erosion before it gets to streams and larger bodies of water. This slide was from the last presentation. This is just an overview of what it would take if we wanted to administer our own local erosion control program. And just the steps and the cost. So I don't want to get too much into that because it's a repeat, but it would take our own ordinance, have to get approved by the state, have to be, vehicle staff, they need to be certified and experienced, and then our local interlocal agreement would change with Gaston County, and they would no longer provide that service for us. So adding more and more requirements to our ordinance when we're not the administrator, it gets a little dicey to add those requirements if we can't enforce it. So if no one has any further questions, I'll let Gaston County give an overview of their program and what they do to help limit the sedimentation.
Any questions for Kate? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We probably would reserve the right to ask questions later as we have discussions. No one's ever really through here. But we will hear from the county then.
Okay, sounds good. And here's these, the quotes, if you wanna go to these.
Good evening, everybody. My name is John Berger. I work for Gaston County's Natural Resources Department. And we, as Kate had mentioned, we have the Soil Erosion Subdivision Control Program with the county, and we form this in Gaston County and all of its municipalities. And I'm just here to give a brief overview of that program. I know that Kate has wanted quite a bit of detail on the turbidity side of things, so I'm not going to touch too much on that. But the purpose of this is just to give a brief overview of the program, and then to also briefly discuss a couple of different things that we've seen in the field be quite effective at reducing turbidity, controlling sediment and erosion. I've been with the county about 9 years now. I did field inspections for quite a while, and now I mainly do planning. So as Kate had mentioned, the sediment and erosion control program is a part of the larger NPDES program that is administered by EPA. EPA can delegate to states, and they have carried out that program, and then the states can delegate local programs. So Gaston County has had a local program delegated by the DEQ since 2003, so we've worked in Belmont city limits since 2003. And we follow NCDEQ model ordinance and their design standards. This is is our team. We do sediment erosion control, stormwater, floodplain management. We're also the Soil and Water Conservation District, so we work with farmers quite a bit with NRCS and all of that from a volunteer standpoint. This is most of our team. There's a couple of folks missing there. But to quickly touch on the foundation, the Sediment Pollution Control Act, 1973, the SPCA is what gives us, NCDEQ and us the authority on site. It's a performance-oriented law, which I'll talk about that here the next couple of slides. And of course, that was developed to prevent pollution by sedimentation of still long development. And then the administrative code gives us the how to enforce the SPCA. It provides the performance standards. You might have heard about designing to the 10-year storm and that sort of thing. And then we've also adopted our erosion sediment control ordinance for DEQ guidance and review. And we're audited by NCDEQ on a routine basis to ensure compliance with that delegation. We use the NCDEQ design manual for plan review, and then when we're inspecting the job sites to make sure that practices are in line with this. This was a document that was put together collaboratively. North Carolina State University was heavily involved, and they still are, in developing and testing these measures. And this manual is about 800 pages, just shy of that. And it sets the parameters and limitations, where to use these measures for the study and tested control measures. This being it's more of a guidance document, so designers can vary from this. They have to show how they're being at least as protective with the measure that they're proposing. But they can take this manual and use it as a baseline so that they don't have to develop practices for every single job site. They can use these. And it's a performance-oriented law. That means that they have to develop a plan that is in compliance with requirements, but they also have to be successful at controlling sedimentation and accelerated erosion. So what we're inspecting for measurable sediment damage, which you see there in that picture. Let's see. So that's all I'll talk about as far as the rules and regulations. I'm sure y'all have probably touched on most of that at this point. But just a brief summary of that is that, county staff reviews plans for compliance, and then we inspect construction sites for compliance with the plans, and to also see if sediment is being retained on site. And so what we're talking about now is additional measures which the developer is required to do if they're not successful at controlling accelerated erosion and sedimentation. That's a picture of me with NCDEQ there. And then we have both of our inspectors have drone license to fly job sites. So I know this has been talked about in depth, but this is kind of Riverside. It's a very large sediment basin in for plan, and it's very, very turbid. But the takeaway here is it takes clay longer to fall out in, say, a sediment basin than the maximum dewatering time frame on a sediment basin for NCDEQ standard. That means the basin will more than likely be turbid with the clay soils we have here. We actually have a soil type called Gaston sandy clay loam. Let's see. So we know that this is a big challenge in this area. So when we're talking about additional measures, this is from the design manual, the state design manual. And when it's talking about additional measures, it gives a lot of flexibility to the design team when developing these. But they want to make sure that they're economical and effective, and they're going to have to be tailored to that job site. It's difficult to make a one-fits-all for these types of situations. This is my summary. We want to make sure that the additional measures are enforceable. We want to make sure that we have a baseline to go off of, that there's thresholds, and it's something that we can go out and force on. And we want to make sure that they're proven effective, that there's data to back up that the measures work. And then if there is a measure that's outside the design manual, we want to make sure that it's at least as protective as a comparable measure in the manual for us to be in compliance. Was there a question? No. So we're talking about some different things that we've seen in the field that have proven effective. I'm going to touch on vegetative buffers, having a 3-phase erosion and sediment control plan. This is kind of a mouthful, but it's the best way that I could put it is having perimeter vegetated diversion ditches that remain throughout construction untouched. Enhanced first inlet zone sediment basins and using chemical treatment. So enhanced vegetative buffers, this has already been adopted by Belmont. So this is going to be a huge benefit, already setting that offset to the water course. The design manual and the requirements, it's for sediment control purposes, it's not a set buffer, it's, there's just a stipulation of having a large enough vegetative buffer from the job site, element of disturbance to the top of the stream bank to capture visible sediment in the first 25% of the buffer. So there's buffers that we can look at, but having a set buffer width right off the bat is gonna make these plans move through much more efficiently, and it'll make the plan review a much smoother process. Having a 3-phase plan, currently the state minimum is 2 phases. What that means is basically the picture on the left there shows very early development, basically taking the trees off, scrubbing the site. You have, all these are kind of small, it's hard to see, there's a large sediment basin in that picture. And the second phase would be the one on the right, so everything's built pretty much assuming it's all still disturbed. How are they still meeting sediment control requirements? And the in-between phase, which we would call a rough grading plan, it's kind of halfway there. And this is the phase that I am visualizing when we're doing plans that are submitted to me by design engineers, and trying to ensure that in this in-between phase, that requirements are being met. Requiring a 3-phase plan would just mean that the design community would really have to have a deep understanding of means and methods and how this works in the field. And having that in-between plan is very helpful for inspectors and grading contractors to be able to, there's less questions on how they proceed with the site, because it's never fully just sitting in one of these phases. This one is a big one. It's kind of hard to nail down, but I did want to bring it up. So what I'm getting at here, and in this picture it kind of illustrates this, is having a diversion ditch that is along the limits of disturbance that is vegetated, and it remains in place throughout the build of the job site. And it would basically, you're not going to be grading or filling in the ditch behind it, you're not moving the ditch, it remains functional and carries runoff to that sediment basin. And then in the end, if you have storm drainage system installed which conveys it elsewhere, you can close that out. It's a lot easier to implement, maintain, and it's a lot more successful at controlling sediment and erosion. Temporary or unstable diversion ditches, what they would do here is the fill slope would go all the way out to the limits of disturbance. The contractor would adjust that ditch up the slope. It increases the risk of sedimentation. Getting that ditch back in for rain, it's not going to be stabilized at that point. And most of the sediment that's captured in these basins comes from eroded ditches. The reason why this is not done, why it's not more common to have these ditches in place, is it ultimately would mean a loss in developable area. And just the challenge of the sites nowadays that are being developed in the steep topography, having that ditch along the perimeter means your sediment basin has to be downslope, which means you would have to have a spot, that you weren't going to develop, that you could put your basin and likely your permanent stormwater pond as well. That usually is not the case, so you'll see a basin in line with lots. So the lot pads would be all up along that tree line, which means to do that, phase 1 of this plan, your ditch would be in the job site. Further, you'd have other measures behind that ditch, then as you start filling, that ditch moves up the slope. So it would affect, the build out of these sites, and it would significantly impact that in a negative way. I think that's why it's not done. And all I'm getting at with this slide is when this is achievable, this is very, very helpful in keeping sediment on site. Another thing that I've seen work really well is having an enhanced inlet zone. This is just something that I came up with as far as labeling it. On the left side, there's an excavated first inlet zone of a sediment basin. On the right, there's an earthen forebay on the bottom and the top, and then there's turbidity curtains that are used. And you can see the change in turbidity from one to the next. It looks pretty clean going to the outlet control structure that would be at the top left. So I think the reason why this can be very effective is you have basically a stop. It's a plunge pool. The typical baffles will allow water to move through quicker. When you have an earthen forebay like this, it really slows the velocity down. You can see a lot of sediment in that first inlet zone, and water is very good at slowing the velocity of water. So we've seen that work very well, and that's not a hard thing to do on the job site. And a lot of contractors will just do it because they know it works. And I'm not sure how much in depth went into chemical treatments, this is from NC State. I pulled this off their website. They make the statement that it's very, very difficult to get all the suspended clay and fine silts out of the water before it leaves job sites. And they're making the case that to reduce that turbidity, you either store it for weeks to years or filter it, which is very, very high maintenance and expensive, or treat it with chemical flocculants. And this is a summary as well. This picture shows someplace on a wall which would then go to a sediment basin.
Pan.
Yes, yeah, the polyacrylamide. So this is something that NC State has studied quite extensively. Some job sites do use this, and it binds to the clay particles and allows it to fall out of suspension much faster than a typical couple of weeks. So turbidity will always be present in construction sites. Polyacrylamide can be effective in reducing the turbidity. Should be tailored to the job site and the soils that it has, the situations, the topography that you're dealing with, what it's discharging to possibly. You want to make sure that you collect that on-site, say in a sediment basin, because of concerns if you want it to fall out of suspension in a sediment basin. It can be toxic to wildlife if it gets into the stream. If it falls out of suspension in the stream, it would basically coat the stream in sediment. So, but using polyacrylamide is an option. We have a number of job sites that have that in their conditional rezoning to use that when turbidity levels get high, if regular maintenance and of their control measures isn't that effective at reducing turbidity. And just as important as what works is what we've seen be problematic: retaining walls, oversized sediment basins. I'll get into why I have that on here, and the incorrect application of control measures. So Kate had mentioned this, some really large retaining walls. Usually they're using retaining walls along the perimeter to pad out those lots for a roadway, and it's very, very difficult to design anything for sediment control here. It could work in phase one, it could work in phase two, but as soon as you start getting ready to build this wall, you have to take other control measures. So the disapprovals on my end, the back and forth between me and design engineers really goes up when you're talking about having to try to design something in this case. So limiting retaining wall height could help with that.
Why is that?
It's the amount of fill dirt that has to be placed there. So that entire wall there would have been naturally like a valley. So there would be a drainage area that went there.
Okay.
And in order to build the wall, they're gonna have to start placing dirt and then start compacting and bringing it up. And it takes a while to do that. And in the meantime, that water is rushing to that area, and they have such a narrow area between the wall and the limits of disturbance. And it's just very difficult to control that sediment.
Is there certain measures, things, if I think about Del Webb, they probably have one of the largest retaining walls I think I've ever seen, me personally.
This
I
is
mean,
that job site.
Did you guys happen to work with them to mitigate the issues that would be caused by that large retaining wall?
Yeah, there's, when they submitted some plans and some of the phases out there, started working with ESP quite a bit, on the alternative measures that can be used in these types of situations. There's kind of a void in that area, because of the small amount of area. You're not gonna be able to put a sediment basin there, and you're not gonna be able to put a diversion ditch there because it's the low point. So they took a different approach and used some alternative measures in the other phases, and it worked better. But there's a lot of discussions and meetings and plan reviews to kind of try to figure this situation out to deal with these large walls. And then I didn't take this picture, but not that tall. But, this picture was taken of Del Webb. This is a retaining wall, obviously. You see the vehicles there, and with sediment erosion control design, the design manual asks designers to try to work with the natural topography, and so you aren't having to cut and fill this much. When you have that amount of dirt there, and that's very difficult to control. So trying to work with the topography of the land is very challenging, there seems to be a threshold where they actually can cause problems. Now, oversized basins, the reason they're proposed is to provide more storage and to try to reduce the turbidity, which is a good thing, and it can help. Some of the problems that we run into with that are extended install times, taking months to put in a basin. That's the most vulnerable point in a job site. You really don't have any primary measures in place, so when you have to open, acres and acres of land to be able to put the basin in, and then it takes months to put it in, we can't have that. So now what we're looking at is, if that's the case, we need to have another phased plan just for the basin installation. And kind of forcing grades I'm getting at there, a lot of these ponds are put in phase 2, final stormwater treatment. And like this picture here, those retaining walls had to go in phase 1, which means like right up front before we even say, okay, you can mass grade the site. So dealing with that can be a challenge. Volume in and of itself can be really effective, having more volume in a sediment basin deeper. Kind of the other reasons I mentioned, the 4-bay benefits. Surface area can be a challenge. This is my thoughts on this. As the surface area of the basin, the footprint of the basin grows to treat surface dewater for a larger storm event, those smaller storm events, that means that water is going to be a smaller column. And it's going to sit on the basin floor for longer. The sediment basin will dewater that really turbid water for much longer than it would with a smaller surface area. So that, in my opinion, surface area can be a challenge. It also means that you're having to grade more to get the basin in. This is from the inspector's guide with DEQ, just basically saying the same thing. I don't need to go into that. The last thing I really wanted to touch on was incorrect application of control measures. And this is just for information purposes. We're reviewing to make sure that measures are used according to NCDEQ design manual. And it'll say non-compliant silt fence application has consistently caused erosion and sedimentation issues that would have not otherwise existed without the silt fence there. This is from the design manual, and this states, you don't want to basically use it appropriately, and if you're putting it in concentrated flow areas, you can cause problems. And we see that quite a bit. I was just going to give a couple examples of what we see in the field, and the reason why I'm looking at this very closely in plan review. This silt fence here caused quite a bit of sediment to move at the base. This is some super silt fence, a lot of great vegetation there. It's receiving concentrated runoff and caused that to fail. There was offset sediment, which I'll show. Here's just another picture of all that soil that was moved because that silt fence is not on contour. And it's basically creating this erosion, and the soil moved down, and then we're dealing with this type of situation. Or rolling off of a roadway, there's mulch back there, there's no need for the silt fence, it's causing sedimentation to occur. Or if it's left in place, it can cause this, which is some pretty severe gullying over time. It can get grown up. Maybe this part wasn't seen because it was all grown up with kudzu and all that. And then just the environmental impacts of it, is something to think about as well. This is just a picture to show a smaller residential build where we had a complaint on the left of sediment off-site. You can see that. The silt fence there, and our civil law inspector worked with a builder, and they installed a swale along the right side of the house. He matted it, and put a small rock berm at the pipe of that culvert, and that solved the problem. Silt fence is not a requirement. It's just one of many, many devices in an almost 800-page document that can work fantastic, but they all of them just have to be used according to those state standards. So in summary, if we're looking at additional measures, there's options out there being a performance-based program. We just need to make sure they're enforceable, effective, and at least as protective as those in the design manual. And as Kate had mentioned, there's always going to be a risk with land development, sedimentation risk. And this picture here shows, the amount of dirt that's being moved. But, this is what we're going to have to deal with, in order to get to this point. And so just looking at making sure that the additional measures that we're pursuing, trying to capture it further up in the land development process, and maybe thinking very big picture on the items that we see cause problems would be the way to approach it. Is there any questions?
So it sounds like self-fencing and where it's located and how it's installed is certainly a major contributor to sedimentation, what you say, right?
Yes.
So in your experience, when you see, percentage of those are typically caused by either improperly located or improperly installed silt
I
fence?
think it would depend on the type of development. Again, silt fence can be a very, very effective measure. We're not singling any one measure out, but it is so commonly used. I think it's used probably in excess of, and more than it can really handle. But if you look at any residential construction, it'll be wrapped in silt fence. If it's supposed to be receiving sheet flow, basically even with grade, that's pretty much impossible on most of those scenarios. So it'll take the water and push it and cause it to fail. I don't really know a percentage, but it's a big enough problem where our single lot inspector, that's his priority right now, is educating just everyone that he talks to and showing the different ways of controlling it. Silt fence is used quite a bit, and we will recommend it on certain cases, but just the topography that we have, it's very difficult to use it as much as it's been used, has been leaned on. It's a little bit different to talk about that, and I've done a lot of meetings with the design teams that are coming in submitting plans to talk about this, and just talk about alternatives and just making sure that it's used appropriately. But it can cause erosion to occur and soil loss to build up, takes it to one spot, whereas, if there was a different measure there, such as a vegetative buffer, that could work much better. It's just, sediment erosion control is very site-specific, and that's why these larger, greater than 1 acre sites, they submit the plans for review, and, we're looking at that from a plan review standpoint, but, I think, silt fence used in residential, small, single lot buildings is something that we're trying to work with the development community on.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So my understanding is we also have the Riverkeeper and Lake Wylie Marine Commission here, and they were going to provide comments and feedback on some of these proposals that we've seen. Is that correct? That's what I understood from Kate. Yes.
If they want to, yes, sir.
All right. They seem to want to.
My job to talk about committees, so might as well. Well, I'm Jen Dunn. I'm the South Fork Watershed Manager with Catawba Riverkeeper. I manage an autonomous sensor on the South Fork, so I can answer your question. We have one in South Carolina that withstood the hurricanes. They're not going to break on you. They're okay. So I manage them. We've recommended autonomous sensors a lot in a lot of conditional rezoning, some even here in Belmont. That typically goes hand in hand with a numeric turbidity standard, because right now with the state standard for construction is the stormwater discharges don't have a numeric standard. They are designed to catch 85% of the sediment, and a lot of times that catches the sand and the silt, but it's not the clay. And the clay particles, as we talked earlier, they're so fine and small that they are what stay in suspension forever. Not forever, but they can stay in suspension for several months. And those are the things that aren't quite caught by them. So that's why oftentimes having that 85% catch is so problematic, because you're not catching the stuff that's really harmful. So a lot of times we suggest the use of a numeric turbidity monitor with these standards. The standards that we are suggesting are with the Virginia standards. So the state of Virginia just recently put forth their own numeric turbidity standards that are slightly different than the EPA's. The EPA's is 50 for waterways. With Virginia, they have 3 different standards for different construction sites. They have just the standard of your average weekly monitoring has to be below 50 at all times. They also have the standard of your NTU has to be below 150 at all times. And that's just any measurement. These measurements are taken daily. When you have a construction site in Virginia, starting from 15 minutes after the construction starts dewatering, you have to take it then, and then every day afterwards until you stop dewatering. And they also have, the third one is, you can have your NTU 50 above what the upstream site is, so you have to prove that you're not putting over 50 NTU more than it was supposed to be before you started introducing things. So one of the problems I think people are concerned with when it comes to turbidity monitors is that they can be tricky to handle and they can be expensive. It's also expensive to have these things with just grab samples. So in Virginia, they often recommend doing grab samples every day, and this can be expensive as you have to buy a turbidimeter. The Huck turbidimeter, which is approved by the EPA, costs about $2,000 to purchase, and then you have to pay someone to go out there every single day and take the measurements, and then we'll get the sample and then go back and measure it. And then you also have the liability aspect of oftentimes where these discharges are, there's lots of riprap and lots of tripping hazards. Someone who walks on riprap all the time, it is not fun. But so there's also that aspect of it. I did a little bit of research on some prices for these things. The model that we have at Catawba River Keeper is by In Situ, and we have the Aquatrol 500. You can rent one of these for $1,200 a month. So if you, for every year that you have, if you're at a construction site with, say, 3 retention ponds, oftentimes I see 2 to 3, so I just went with 3. So if you have 3 retention ponds and you're having 1 turbidity monitor at each of these right below the outfall, it's going to cost you approximately $7,200 to run these per year. And if you, and let's say it's the city or whoever municipality is in charge doesn't want to pay for it, and the last resort is to put this on the people who are buying those homes, it'll cost about an extra $432 a year for each home that you buy. If there's, I did this on base like 100 home, like 100 lot neighborhood that's being developed. So this would add about $1.20 onto their monthly mortgage. So having these things, I think, would be a significantly greater benefit to the community of ensuring they have clean water for generations to come. And also if they live near a lake and want to continue enjoying recreating on that lake. Lake Wiley right now, specifically from the South Fork, does face a lot of erosion problems and sediment problems, and there's islands in Lake Wiley that didn't used to be there 10 years ago because of sediment. So I think there's a significantly greater benefit to having that additional cost onto people, onto these home buyers, than it would be if we didn't have it. The other way that Virginia does their standards that we encourage with our conditional rezonings, with our autonomous sensors, is once you hit those thresholds that I mentioned earlier of either 150 MTU or above it, that is, you have to immediately stop dewatering or discharging from those stormwater catches, and you have up to 5 days to inspect them, repair them, or assess what's going on. One of the primary ways that we are now recommending people handle these high turbidity levels in these catch areas is the polyacrylamide, PAMs that we were just talking about. So PAMs, the way that they're applied typically in construction settings like this, is the same way that you do hydro seeding to make sure that the ground is covered. You would deploy it through there. The recommendation there is about 1 pound of polyacrylamide for 10 acres, and you can also do it in the retention ponds. And the recommendation there is 1 pound per 100 gallons, and polyacrylamide is roughly $6 per pound. So I believe, once again, this is a very cost-effective way of ensuring that our rivers stay clean and these wonderful places people are buying their homes near to enjoy stay clean, and also so we have general good water quality for us to drink.
Your experience with this monitoring is you mentioned it's all been through conditional rezonings, correct?
That is, we have our own that we do on the South Fork, just for like our own purposes, for me to see what's going on. But we have recommended in several Belmont cases, I believe we've gotten some of them, that we do have these monitors there.
But you're not familiar with any municipality within Gaston County that has these requirements as part of, say, their ordinance, are you? And would enforce them on their own?
There's some steps kind of happening with the city of Lowell with, that I believe was put in place in like 2022, and they have some new, there's some turnover in the elected officials there, and there's been kind of a hiccup there in that moment. But we are working with Lowell to get these different kinds of numeric standards with their city.
What about Cramerton?
Cramerton, we do not have anything there yet. We have suggested in some conditional rezonings to have these monitoring and these standards, but we haven't been able to get any of them.
So you can't speak to, you know, we saw a slide on the enforcement and what it would entail. You wouldn't necessarily speak to that. You're just speaking of your experience with the monitors that you've been able to install and read. Is that correct?
Yes, as a nonprofit, I don't really have any enforcement power. I can just kind of, the most I can do is I can go take a sample and then I can like go tell, but that's the most that I can do. I don't have any enforcement power.
Any additional questions? Was that, I'm assuming that's all you had?
Yeah,
I didn't want to interrupt you, but that's okay. Thank you.
if you have any further questions, you can just mark me.
Thank you.
So I believe we will hear from the, oh, here comes the bat. Is there an issue?
Yes, this week.
There we go. So, very good. I believe we shall hear from the Lake Wiley Marine Commission.
Yeah, here's the pictures of the sensors in the Del Webb project. You got a picture of where they are, the solar panel, the size of the wire is about the size of your finger. It's one of those pictures in there, and where it goes into the water. I'm Neil Brennan, the Executive Director of the Lake Wiley Marine Commission. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you again. And I'm not going to take a lot of your time because a lot of what's already been said by the county and by Jen. You already covered a couple of things. The purpose of that Seaman system over there, where they have all these different monitors and streams and so on that feed Lake Wiley. The purpose of the one that they put in for Boyd's Cove, alert the city inspectors of the potential failures of the erosion control devices for the initiation of appropriate follow-up action. So again, we're not going to enforce anything based on a high turbidity reading from one of these sensors, not the object. Identify the exceedances of the water quality target of 25 NTUs, which is what it is for lakes, and assessing the effectiveness of those plans. Right. So again, it's like the monitor in your car. You got a little low pressure in your tire. It tells you to go check your tire. If you got a high temperature in your water coolant, you go check and find what's going on. The whole idea is an alert system to let people know if there's a problem with the erosion control measures that are there already been approved. And the county enforces if there's a violation. That interlocal agreement says, we're going to submit the plans, and the county enforces. You don't want to get involved in that plan of where y'all do this yourselves. That's just not reasonable. It doesn't work. As far as the cost is concerned, when we did the calculations for Del Webb a couple of years ago, for those sensors that they put in there were 800 lots there, it would have cost each homeowner, because the developer's going to pass the cost on to the homeowner, going to cost each of them $200. One time, period. Somebody said, you're going to pass that cost on to the homeowner. Exactly. Want to live on my lake? You got to pay to live here a little extra, and $200 isn't that much. Right? Nice dinner in downtown Charlotte with drinks. Or Belmont. Yeah, right. The drift. The drift. You got it.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah.
So, again, the Lakeview Farms people agreed to put in these sensors. Years ago, when we got the Del Webb people to agree to this, I talked to Stephen Henshaw, who's part of the developer down there for Lakeview Farms. He said, Neil, I'll put these in. Just don't make me do bathymetric surveys. Okay, all right, they're off the table. But, so, this is not unusual. And the key here is you get a continuous alert. And that's all it is. It's a monitoring system that says, hey, there might be something wrong, go take a look. If you got that signal on your car, you go take a look. So that's all it is. The enforcement comes later, not your job. You have a third-party inspector who responds to these alerts. They go out and take care of things. I just spent the last couple of days traipsing through the lots in Reflection Point where some of the silt fences have failed. I've got some really bad pictures I can show you where the water's just streaming down from these last things. The attitude of some of these folks who put it, these developers who put these stormwater control measures in places, set them and forget them. I did this, I've met my commitment, I'll see you later, I'm gonna build my house, okay? So it takes guys like me to go out and say, your silt fence is failing, and you don't have the proper kind because the slope is so great, you have to have a high hazard silt fence, or one with chain link fence, or a super silt fence as described. So the autonomous monitor, yeah, do they cost? Yeah, put it on the developer. He's got deep pockets, believe me, they do. There's no problem with that. And then get into a system, whether it be C-MAN, the continuous monitoring and notification network, or pay some other company, or have the developer pay some other company, doesn't matter. But I just suggest you use them. Now, the same thing that of the grab samples, that's an alternative, it's a pain. You've heard a lot of this NTU, that NTU, forget it. If the one up here is high, and the one down here is higher, then there's a problem with the one down here. Go look, that's all. It's a system that tells you to go take a look, and if there's a problem, go fix it. Because a lot of these developers, they put them in, and it's gone. The county does a very good job in enforcing. Let them do their job. Just let them know when they need to go do it. Sir?
We heard earlier that there seemed to be some question about the accuracy and the maintenance required on these monitors. What's your experience there?
I don't have any experience with that. I defer to the Catawba Riverkeeper because they've got them installed up there. And I defer to Kate because she's got the data from those systems. And one of the telling things was you saw some spikes on the rainfall, but there wasn't a problem with this monitor. That tells, hey, the systems are working okay. The erosion control measures in there are doing fine. Okay, fine, no problem. Continue to march, as we used to say in my former life. So, again, it's an indicator only.
Right.
And like anything, it has to be calibrated once in a while to make sure it's functioning okay. The C-MAN system, they've got every 15 minutes they get a readout on these monitors in their streams over there. It's really quite a system. And again, why do they do it for Palisades? Those three things, just, alert inspectors of the failure of the erosion control devices.
So the Palisades is one example that does use.
Yeah, and they have a whole plan, they call it the autonomous monitor. It's about 3 or 4 page thing that who's assigned to go do this and who's do that, and so on and so forth. And it comes right out of their ordinance over there. As does the idea of doing the grab sample, so either way. But it's quite a system, and I talked to the folks over there a while ago about could we tap into their system? As Kate said, yeah, you could for a fee. Everything costs a little bit, not unreasonable. And my thought is, again, that developer's got deep enough pockets he can afford to put it in.
What's your opinion about some of the alternative methods that were suggested this evening?
Yeah, matter of fact, one of the things that we found is there's some of the driveways on our lots that are in Reflection Point that are very steep. And one of the pictures, the video the other day of this water, this brown water just streaming rapidly down toward the catch basin, which goes into the lake. If we were adjusting our ordinance over there, our guidelines that say, okay, there's a thing called and we have to help into this pig sediment sock. It's like these tubes you see that you can put across the driveway that'll catch this stuff. It's not a silt fence, but it works different. It's the same idea. It just captures this stuff. It's something that could be removed and put in. If you know rain's coming, just throw this thing down. It might help stem some of the flow. So yeah, there's some other methods.
So what about like during construction? We've heard about vegetative buffers, restrictions on retaining walls.
Well, the vegetation is the best thing. If you've got a good long field downstream of where your construction is that can filter the water before it hits the lake or anything like that, that's a good thing. That's why the larger the buffer, the better. And some of matter of fact, the River District, I remember years ago, when they were getting geared up, they had a presentation, they were gonna have a 100-foot buffer. Now, state law says you have to have at least 50 foot. But they said they're gonna do 100 feet before. and you look at the Lakeview Farms construction, they had quite a big buffer between that and any of the home sites. So that's, I think the county might agree that.
Well, I'm assuming that's what, on the plan, because Lakeview Farms hasn't started construction yet.
That's on the plan.
Right.
That's on the plan. That plan was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
remember
this
they went above.
has been burning for a while.
Yeah.
So, again, the idea is common sense. You know, don't get hung up on this number, that number, 50, the state says it. Compare the two. I used to have to inspect different aspects of the nuclear power program. And one ship had 2 reactors. So you look at how they keep the records on this reactor and how they keep them. And you say, why is there a difference there? It's the same ship, you know. So again, take a look. Here's this monitor upstream, and like that picture showed. And here's the one up in the cove. Is there a difference between the two? Why? Is it the backfill? Might be. Go look. Go look. And if it's not, if it is backfill, you'll know by looking. If something's failed, the other key word that Jen said was stop dewatering. Right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, the Georgia folks have a valve on the outflow. A butterfly valve. They could put a lock on that thing so nobody can mess with it. But that's, oh, goodness, we don't want to put a lock on anything. But I don't know how else you'd stop dewatering if your skimmers was fouled, you know, and you were passing all this stuff right out. So that's another thing to consider. Again, that's another state. They have the thing, but I proposed that to Gaston County. It was almost like I'd taken the turkey off of Thanksgiving Day dinner. We will not have, you know, okay, I got you.
Right in Raleigh.
So, again, there's different views about how to do this, but the common sense is give yourself a system that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to pay for, and it tells you whether there's a problem or not. Common sense. Questions?
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to
Glad.
talk with you all again. Thank you.
Miles,
Yes.
is there,
And then right, these.
If it's all right, if I can address the council with Gaston County, is that okay?
please?
Thank you for having us here. I'm with the county, I'm Joseph Long, the road control and stormwater manager for the county. I'm over the program that we implement for Gaston County and all of its 11 municipalities that are in a little agreement, including Belmont. And I just want to kind of clarify and see if y'all have any questions, because, and I know Neil has talked about certain things, and a lot has been thrown at you that's maybe that needs a little bit of clarification on how things function in our program. Like John has stated, John is my head plan reviewer. We are delegated by the state. This is a state program that's the EPA allows the state of North Carolina to implement on a state level, and then the state has the right to delegate local authority to counties or even cities. As Kate mentioned, that the town has the right to do that, but you have to request that and be delegated. Anything that's dealing with enforcement, there is a protocol, and we have to follow state standards for that protocol. When it comes to enforcement and like saying issuing enforcement and civil penalties, we can do civil penalties, but there is a protocol we have to go through. And usually that's dealing with an inspection, if there's an out of compliance issue, is there a failure? Because all these measures are limited. They're performance-based, as John stated. They are designed to meet a certain standard, and the standard that they have to follow is up to a 10-year storm event. Everything has to be designed to a 10-year storm event, because if you design it for heavier storms, like 25, 50, and more than that, you won't be able to do certain things. So the state set it, and that's a state standard, 10-year storm event. And we follow that in our model ordinance. Our ordinance was adopted. It was a model ordinance, so we went through the process and submitted to the state, and it has to meet at least their model ordinance, and that's what ours is. When you talk about City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, they're a different level. They have extra measures for stormwater, and that was also mentioned, stormwater. We do implement some stormwater. Belmont is a phase 2 community. You have an MS4 permit. permit for post-construction, which a lot of this construction that we're reviewing for has post-construction stormwater measures that go in place to help with flooding or retention of water, things of that, post-construction, once all the pavement goes in place. But with that, having more stricter, you have to go through a process with the state. And that design manual they have, as John mentioned, is also something that's looked at and reviewed by the state through, NC State is a big component of that. They have a research farm in Raleigh that they go through to update that. And of course, they work with other entities such as DOT and all that. But when it comes down to something like talking about turbidity, turbidity standards, like saying, vary because of the type of soils. And you gotta look at it from the big picture because the type of soil makes the difference on how turbid the water is. The heavier clays that we have, which we have around here, as you look at some of these developments, some are bright orange to dark red. There are several different soil types. You can go down the road from one place and go, a quarter mile down the road and it's a totally different soil type. Depends on where you're at in the divider. Topography plays a big role in it. But with that type of clay, it does suspend real easily, which causes turbidity. As you see around here at South Fork, when it rains, it gets pretty turbid. Well, a lot of that too is what's on the bottom of the South Fork that's been, over time when there wasn't regulations, a lot of sediment and things rolled into it, including farmland and that up in the watershed, up into Lincoln County and other counties rolls down. And we just have to catch it before it gets down and comes down through into Lake Wiley, which is also gets turbid. And a lot of that is kicked up. But like I said, it also is runoff. There's stream bank erosion from some of the streams that go into the major watersheds into South Fork and Lake Wiley. But when it comes to enforcement, get back to that, there is a process. Now, turbidity can't be an enforceable thing that we look at because these plans are reviewed. And if those plans are reviewed and meet state standards that we review to with that design manual, then they get approved. Then they have to implement that plan. So what we do as my inspectors is they visit the site, kind of like an audit. They're not there all the time. We don't do rain inspections because manpower to do that is excessive. I have a staff of 5, and we cover all of Gaston County and 11 municipalities. 2 of those are plan reviewers and intake coordinator, and the other 3 are my inspectors. So we're not going out in the field all the time. That's not the responsibility. That's not even the state's guidelines for that. It's kind of an auditor. When you get a permit approved through our program, it meets state standards, that permittee has the requirement that they self-monitor. And that's maybe what's talked about with these large developments having a monitoring system. But they're supposed to self-monitor their site once a week or after a certain rain event or greater, whichever happens first. So if it rains like the rains we've had back to back to back, they're supposed to be keeping record of that and going around and checking all their devices and see if there's any maintenance. Everything has its limits. They can have a perfect site, but we get a big rain and things get overloaded. A lot of times, it's not a violation, it's just the fact that things got overwhelmed with a lot of hard rain in a short-term time frame, but they were in compliance. So it's all about resetting, clean up, and go forward. If there is any off-site sediment, especially to the river system or a stream, natural waters of the state is what they're called, that is actually the jurisdiction of the state. We do not, if there is impact from one of our construction sites from something that happened, even if it's not their fault, it was overwhelmed by a large rain event that exceeded design. If it's impacted to water states, which are the jurisdiction of the state, the county doesn't have it, the city doesn't have it, the state does. And that's all natural blue channel streams that's on a record, and some of them that may not be on register as a blue line channel on a map can still be jurisdictional if the state water resources staff that comes out and inspects it can determine that. So if there is an impact, we contact them. And if it is in the water and it's heavy turbidity or anything like that, even if these monitors went off, if there is impact from something, or if there is heavy turbidity, it's impacts to water to the state. The state would have the jurisdiction, and they would have to come out of the Morrison Regional Office. They delegate us to look at this, so what we do is in our inspections, we look at the big picture of the project. Are these measures in place according to design standards? According to the approved plan? Are they being maintained? And if they are, and the turbidity coming out of it, it's hard to enforce on that because every site's different. As John said, it's site-specific to those measures and the topography and the soils. Some soils are heavier in the clay and would be more turbid than others. But if they have all their measures in place, they're in compliance. you can't really enforce on them if they're following their plan. Because when I say that, I just want to clarify, if we do something outside the state and enforce more than what the state delegates to do, we get audited, but also we have an environmental review board that monitors this, and every person at any project site or whatever responsible party that had a permit gets a civil penalty. There's a process we usually go through out of compliance, and if it's blatant that they did something that's not part of the plan, then yes, we go right to enforcement. But if, a lot of times it's maintenance, and if they're not maintaining stuff, then it goes to a civil penalty. We issue that civil penalty, they have the right to appeal it. And they have to appeal it before an environmental review board, which is, in this county, we have a 9-member board that represents all facets to make sure, from the building community, to land development community, to the science community, the conservation community, all that members are on our board, and they have the right to appeal that, and if they appeal it, they're gonna ask what happened and what is they appealing, because if you just find them for heavy turbidity, but they have an active plan that met requirements, and they're following guidelines, you basically find them for something that's outside the regulations of the state. So,
In your efforts to maintain compliance, are your inspector visits, are they announced or unannounced usually?
they're unannounced. What we do is we're usually on a cycle. We try to shoot for a cycle of 30 days, and that's a window. There is not a set that you have to be out every time at this time or whatever. Like I said, we're more like an auditor. And like I said, it goes by workload, and it goes by what's happened. We get a lot of complaints, and we have to field those complaints and inspect those complaints and go out, and usually we try to have a 48-hour window. You can just imagine in the heavy rains we've had in 11 municipalities in all of Gaston County, and I actually have 3 field inspectors. That's a lot to field, and you're trying to get to those complaints. So a lot of times we have to see if those complaints are actual complaints that deal with us. Sometimes they're just a stormwater runoff with heavy rain, which is not erosion control. That might be something from a roadway, from DOT out in the county, or one of the municipalities. We stay in contact with all your stormwater staff, because we work with them in permitting and through construction of these permitted sites for your post-construction stormwater requirements for detention and water quality treatment. That some of these places are getting these retention ponds and detention ponds staying in place after construction. You see in some of the subdivisions, that's part of the requirements. And like I said, to look at those in a timely manner, we do those usually on a 30-day window, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less if it's an active site. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of changes, and we get a lot of complaints. But the biggest thing is we don't do rain inspections, and we're not going to be able to do monitoring inspections if the monitor goes off. How we look at it is, what was the current status of that site? Is there actually, we look for the damage. We look for the visible sediment. Is there a failure? Most of the time it's evidence, show me the damage. Is the turbidity, if it's coming out of a basin that's functioning properly, designed properly, and being maintained properly, you're dealing with the type of soil and the amount of rainwater that's come through. And so, and also maintain those, it's all about how that basin is designed to work. As I know it's maybe mentioned, holding it in the pond a little longer by putting a valve or something like that. Well, the biggest thing we gotta look at it too is these things are designed to dewater so they're not staying wet all the time. The longer you wet these ponds and hold water, you risk a chance of blowouts, because you have to dewater with their skimmer device within a certain time, 2 to 5 days typically, as they dewater to get ready for the next rain event. If you're holding it longer and it's just after several small rains, but you're holding, someone's shut it off, it's that person's discretion. How long is that water supposed to stay in that basin? And you can hold it longer, and then the next rain adds to it, and it's not that big a rain, the emergency spillway overtops and blows out sometimes. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it stays wet too long, it can. So that's kind of the factor. Everything has to work in a sequence.
Yeah, question. So, there's one disconnect I'm seeing. You know, you're talking about enforcement. We don't want to be involved in enforcement. I think I hear Mr. Brennan saying, you know, Belmont doesn't want to be involved in enforcement. And we've talked about all the rabbit holes and problems that would entail. But is there any, so if we just say, well, we want to require monitoring and the data to be sent somewhere, period, end of story, is there any unintended consequences of doing that? Would that lead us into some of these problems with enforcement? We just say, thou shalt monitor and install monitors, and thou shalt transmit data to X or whatever. So I'm just wondering, in 200 words or less,
Yes, I know it gets late.
if, you know, is there some sort of disconnect, or can the two positions be aligned that we can achieve this desired result without establishing the thorny problems of enforcement?
Well, like I said, you can collect that data, and you can look at it from a large scope of what that data can tell you. The biggest thing is maybe mention that they have alarms on them. Some of them do turbidity alarms. We're not going to be monitoring alarms. My staff, I'm not going to require them, alarms going off at 2 a.m. because we have a midnight storm. You got to get out there and look at it. That's not the case we're doing now. You collect that to see how things are improving. Just understand too, location of the monitors can be a big factor. If you're putting it at a cove that everything from a subdivision drains to one cove, that's different. But if you're putting it out towards main channel or in a cove that other things drain to it, it's hard to get a precise reading on it, because like I said, when it rains around here, the water level comes up in the creeks naturally erode. They do. The stream banks do naturally erode when those creeks rise, because we've got more development, water running to those creeks. And also the creek is part of the river system coming down from other counties, which has some natural erosion on, they have farm fields and stuff like that. So that's why the South Fork stays muddy. Not blaming on farm fields from now, but in the past, that's why it stays muddy. It's got a muddy bottom to
So
it.
whose responsibility is it, to locate the monitors? If we were to do that, whose responsibility would it be?
Well, that's something you would get in agreement with the developer and what you're kind of looking at and what benefits you want to get data from for the future. We're not requiring them to put monitors in. We can't, because it's not a state requirement. And we're not saying, well, if you do put a monitor, put it here. Because, like I said, every site's different. You may have multiple basins that have discharge points. And wherever you're putting your monitor, there might be other factors in the stream channel or in the river channel that's coming down and impacting it from something else.
So is that something that Kate and her staff would have the ability to tell us with, if we were to decide to do that, to know where to locate?
Yes. Based on the staff recommendation, it says that we do not want to include requiring turbidity monitoring at all. We've had an agreement with Gaston County for over 20 years. They're responsive. They come out when there's issues. I think that if we got down the path of us putting turbidity monitors in, you can see that there's so much stuff going on. I don't think it's fair that our staff would be the ones that have to get the alarm that goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning. We're not set up to take alarms. That's additional duties for staff right now. If you're taking away a duty that somebody may be doing now, just to receive these alerts and then turn around and call the counties, and the county can come out. And so that's why staff said no. We really don't want to do any kind of turbidity monitoring. If a developer is going to put them in,
It'd be for just research and
it's kind of like the data that we have right now. There's, you have high readings that there's not even a rain event. So I mean, that would be an alert to a staff member, for example, and then they would take that data. It's not even raining outside, and have to pass that along to the county if it was a requirement from staff. If you want to see data, then you could do like Del Webb, have Del Webb put them in, send them to us. We don't even get the data unless we ask for them at this time. So
does it go to the city or county?
They keep it until we ask for it, and so
we're self-monitoring, basically.
Yeah, self-monitoring. So that's when you want to see the data, it shows you what the data is, and Kate provided the data to everyone. But there's really nothing that we can do from it.
To your point last time, what do you do with that data when you get it?
Well, Well, here's just a few minutes, because I'm jotting some stuff down. So we keep talking about this alarm going off at 2 a.m. Understood, don't send someone out there. But what it could indicate is when we get to normal working hours, maybe someone should go out there and check to see, do we see any remnants? Are the silt fences down? Was there a potential issue with the pond itself? Because we're saying we're doing an audit. The way I look at this may be a good indicator to direct these audits in some instances. Because all of a sudden, if we see this high turbidity, maybe it is because, everything's kind of flowing into this area, and, we check it, okay, we'll cross it off, it's a false alarm, we just won't pay attention to it. But if we're starting to get these indicators and it's reading, don't send someone at 2 AM, I get it, but at least put it on a list to say, maybe we keep going back to this area just to double check it, and then it narrows the focus of an already kind of, spread thin team in regards to where things should be focused. I mean, that's kind of where my headspace
It's
starts.
more of a diagnostic measure to possibly indicate
So-
larger problem.
And we've already discussed a few times tonight, this is retroactive, but by not fixing or correcting these issues, for a period of time, it could be potential detriment to the period. I feel like, the quicker you fix it, the less the problem will be,
Well,
right?
what-
So even if it's retroactive, or we're kind
Will
of,
we fix it?
well, that's when you start the enforcement piece to it.
Well,
But it can't be retroactive, right?
Well, if you were to go out to the site and help me understand this, right, and you're saying silt fence is down, you're saying that there's potential issues with their ponds or whatnot, I feel like that's enforceable, right?
well, like I said, the biggest challenge with these monitors, like I said, it's not been a standard, or it's not something the state has, and we don't have it here. What does that open the door for? Because like you said, send someone out and look at it. Well, you gotta understand, I have staff that has a schedule to look at all these other places, and they may go out there and it's just, well, it's turbid because the river's turbid and there was other factors contributing to that turbidity. But when they go out to a site, they have to inspect the entire site. And the size of these sites are hundreds of acres, some of them are, and it takes them hours, a lot of times, to go out there, and they don't just get a big picture, they have to walk the perimeter and look for any evidence, anything. And that's usually, like I said, we're doing that in a cycle. And as these permittees are, they have to self-inspect, and they have to keep record of that. And even the state that's basically over us, they come down, they can pull their records as well. We gotta show us the damage. So if there's a failure, it's usually like left behind, there's sediment, measurable sediment, beyond the measure, beyond the silt fence, beyond the basin, in the buffer, things like that. It's usually not cleaned up overnight. That's something that we'll look at, or if we get a call, there is off-site sediment visual here. You see the damage. Now, a turbidity monitor going off in a cove somewhere, or in the river downstream, it's hard to say it's coming from this one particular plot in this 200-acre site. You have to go back out and redo it. I'm not saying we would ignore a problem, but we would look at what we've had, and these sites, they're supposed to keep up with their stuff, and their data, usually it's a third party recording all this, and they have to do it properly. They can't fudge the numbers, so to speak. And like I said, if they're not self-reporting, you can basically enforce upon them and go back. It's like saying it's the moment in time, you have the evidence there. You have to look at the records, or like I said, if we have off-site sediment, then that's measurable sediment.
So to your point, I don't see how you could ever, even if we decided to adopt it, I don't see how you could apply this retroactively. So then, if you think about going forward, the scope of area that this would actually, could apply to, I mean, how much more waterfront large tracts do we have in the incorporated Belmont? How much?
You've got a huge one, it's called Pittenger 2 and 3, south of Del Webb. That's a huge area across a critical river, the South Fork River, right, that's filling in with sediment.
Yeah, you're right. I overlooked Pittenger too.
So you mentioned something, if you put it in specific code, so if it's specific to the development, right? And, we don't know the historical trend, I understand that's an issue, right? Who knows if this is just a dumping code regardless if it's the development or not. But if you put it in a code that's specific and not like right off the channel or whatnot to the development, would that not be a good indicator for you guys to go down there and say, you know what, maybe we should check this out? This is a code that's being developed completely all around it, right? From, let's say, Pittenger 2 or 3 or somewhere in that area, right? We could go out there and check it. And then you mentioned you see the sediment after the fact. So if it's clear you see that sediment coming from an area, then that should be an indicator to say something's potentially failing here, right?
Well, yes, but to that, when you're dealing with the code, you're also dealing with tailwater backing up in the code. When the river comes up, it's turbid coming down the river. And a lot of that water backs up to the cove sometimes. I'm not saying you're not having something come into the cove from up above, but you're also having water back up into it. And these things are sensitive, they can just be going off. But then you guys talk about resources. I have to send staff in a county car and county resources to drive all the way out there to investigate this. And if you're looking at a cove and it's turbid, it's hard to determine, well, is there impacts in there? Is there sediment? because sedimentation is measurable sediment is what you're looking for. And if there is, then we have to look and see if there's something above in the actual project. But if there is anything, even if there was a failure and there's measurable sediment, we have to report that to the state, and the state determines is it an impact or an enforceable issue or what. But like I said, every time it goes off, it's going to be a hard way to deal with resources that I have trying to do this fairly throughout the county, because we're not dealing with the river system in all these towns. Some of these towns don't. You're just fortunate that Belmont has a lot of the river system. And so I can't send a specter right out when the monitor's going off, because it's not part of our ordinance, just to see if there's something going on. I'm not saying it may or may not, but then it's like, is there something that someone calls in, hey, it looks like sedimentation got off, or like I said, the developer's supposed to be doing their own monitoring, their own self-reporting. If we go out there, we can tell because our inspectors are there on a cycle.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good right now.
Okay. Let me just, I do have one for Kate, and that would probably be the last one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so I just want to confirm, because, based on what the Miles has said, putting aside the enforcement aspect of it, that, forget about the enforcement. If all, enforcement being, who cares? Like, let's just focus on the monitoring. Is it still your recommendation that monitoring not be required, even if enforcement were off the table? We said nothing about enforcement. Nobody cares about enforcement. We just put something in the ordinance requiring the monitoring. Would it still be your recommendation that that you would not want that?
Like an alert system?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would wanna know,
What are we gonna do with that?
that's what I wanna know, like, would it be my role to then interpret the data, compare it to rainfalls, and then report that to Gaston County and have them go inspect it, and then what would their time frame be on a reaction, like a reaction time, like how long does it take them to get out there with all their other sites and reporting what they need to do in reviews? Because like the graphs I put in my presentation, they're for about 3 or 4 months of data. That was like 26,000 data points. So I mean, I had to take that data and then compare it to rainfall events. So it is a big effort to not only just get the alert, but then I have to interpret the data and be educated about what I'm reading, and then decide do I think this is a failure, and do I need to alert Gaston County? Also don't want to just keep calling them and have them go out there and there's not a problem on site, and then they, what it cried wolf, like, they might just be like, okay, it's okay with the turbidity monitors again. But, so if it's something that works, then, I mean, maybe, but, I have one engineer for this whole city, and turbidity is one problem, I totally agree. There's a lot of other infrastructure improvements and plan reviews I have to do too, so it could be like a full-time job for somebody to stay on top of the erosion issues, and maybe we need to hire an erosion control inspector. I mean, that would be my suggestion if this is something that you guys want to monitor, because we can install them, but what are we going to do with the data? I guess,
There's no definitive threshold either.
Right, and a lot of it's
You gotta
subjective.
define the
And,
threshold. Then we gotta determine where the turbidity came from.
yeah,
And I feel like those two are just
yeah.
up in the air for left interpretations.
Yeah, the river is already very turbid. I mean, like we saw on the North Monitor, it was somewhere more like in the 12,000 range before it even got to Del Webb, and then it settled out. So that was in a 4-inch rainfall event. So I can guarantee you that some of their measures blew out in a 4-inch rainfall event. But in the South Monitor, it was below 50 the whole time. So to me, the data, it's just like a little voodoo. I don't know. It's hard to say, and we can go out there, but you're probably also gonna get data that's incorrect and alerts that are incorrect and, so I mean, I don't wanna make our inspectors go out there.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just add one thing, we're talking about a third-party inspector. The third-party inspector is in the guidelines that we gave for Del Webb. That's the person who gets the alert. Kate can get it at the same time. The guy calls Kate and says, here's what I found. She doesn't send anybody out. Again, it's an indication. That's all. And somebody else goes and looks because we require that developer to provide an independent third-party inspector. That's how it's supposed to work. I don't care about enforcement either. I just want the guy to go look and see if there's anything wrong, keep from crapping up my lake. Thank you.
Yes, our lake.
Yes, our
yes.
lake.
Do you have a reaction to that, Ms. Goodman?
No, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Miles, we have discussed this at length at multiple meetings over multiple months. Is there a specific action item for us, or what are we to do with all of this?
Well, my recommendation would be that we're not going to require turbidity.
Well, all right. I mean, I think that's fine. I'm fine with that as well. I understand and appreciate the position that everyone, and the information that we've had. I'm not an engineer. And we have an engineer, and we've had multiple engineers, and I think I followed their recommendation at this point. There's a lot of unknowns going with some of these other additional steps, but I think that they can still be accomplished through proactive measures and, through the conditional zoning process, which we've already utilized in several instances. So I don't think there's, as I understand it, there's not really an action item that, what's your?
You don't have to vote, no, that's fine. If we'll take this as information and, there'll be no more presentations on turbidity monitoring.
At least until, getting to 2 and 3 come, I guess, but.
If nothing else, you know that this is obviously an area that's gonna need heightened scrutiny, right?
Yes, and then, I'm not 100% familiar with that area, but I do know, that area already is bordered by homes that exist on the waterfront, so it'll be a roadway and then the development that's the picture 2 and 3. So we can't establish these waterfront buffers like we normally would, because it's already been developed and those homes have been there a while. But it will be very important to help maintain the sedimentation on site, because we will get complaints from those property owners. So it's already on my radar, because the worst thing I want is for those property owners to feel the impact from this development that's going to happen like right across the street from them, with stormwater and erosion control. So it's already kind of on my radar. We already made comments on our sketch plan regarding some of those items.
Thank you, and thank you for all your efforts and the job that you do, and you'll continue.
About this 3 times.
Yes, thank you. All right, very good. Thank you, everyone, for that information. Obviously, it's a very sensitive and important issue, and we will continue to do our best to incorporate these matters into the zonings as they arise. That leads us to item C3, the quarterly finance update. And for that, we have our finance director, Jared Piles. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday.
No other place I'd rather be.
Well, you got the present of knowledge, knowledge about turbidity.
No, I will not be discussing turbidity.
Well,
You can file this.
Yeah, I have a slide.
Oh, dear.
So we'll just jump right in. First, we'll start with revenue, and first I'll highlight some of the This is for the fourth quarter for fiscal year '25, so 7/1/2024 through 6/30/2025. Property tax revenue and collection percentages remain high. We were at a 99.56% collection rate in 2024 versus a 99.69% in 2025. Intergovernmental revenue, which includes sales tax, utility franchise tax, alcohol tax, and PAL bill, all came in as anticipated, with sales tax being the main driver for the 13% over expected revenue, and I have a separate slide on that we will get into shortly. Other general fund revenue includes charges for sanitation, fund balance appropriations, permits and fees, and investment earnings. Fund balance appropriations totaled $825,832 this year. In the water sewer fund, charges for services came in slightly over expectation. Other operating revenues include interest on investments, penalties, system development fees, and grants. For other operating revenues, system development fees are the main driver for higher than expected revenue in 2025. We collected $806,000 in system development fees when we budgeted $300,000. And then in the stormwater fund, revenues came in above expectation, and we have modified the 2026 budget to recognize the additional revenue streams that we've been seeing year over year.
What's the non-recurring revenue in the water sewer fund?
Non-recurring revenue, that would be a fund balance appropriation
Okay.
and a transfer from the general fund back to the water sewer fund to repay the paving loan that we did several years ago.
Thank you.
Any questions on revenue? Okay. Local option sales tax, and it seems to be a trend when I prepare these slides, the previous month's numbers are not available, and the DOR just released the sales tax numbers for June last Friday. So the city has collected $6,289,910. The June figure was $559,405. In comparison, the city collected $5.2 million in sales tax last year, so an increase of about $1 million over the prior year. Any questions on sales tax? We'll jump into the general fund expenditures. All departments came in under the amended budget. Total general fund was 6% under the amended budget. Highlights the future capital that you'll see there is the transfer from ARPA and additional revenue recognition from the budget amendment that was approved at the last meeting. We're expecting to roll approximately $3 million into unrestricted fund balance and $650,000 into restricted fund balance. Prior year fund balance was $19.2 million, which $14 million of which was spendable. Prior year increase was $2.86 million, so about the same increase to fund balance, although I do want to highlight that a majority of that, I'd say 25% of the roll of fund balance this year is that one-time transfer from ARPA.
Just so I'm clear though, when we say they all came in under the amended budget, we just amended the budget because some of them were above the budget, some of the departments were over budget based on the original budget.
That is correct, but we had the revenue available to allocate to departments to clean that up.
Yes.
Any other questions on general fund?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
What would we have done if we didn't have the revenue to offset those expenses?
You would appropriate fund balance to offset the expenditure. Mhm. In the water sewer fund, all water sewer fund departments operated at or below budget. Future capital is the transfer from ARPA, as I already mentioned. Capital expenditures for 2025 was the completion of the North Belmont Booster Pump Station, which was an ARPA-funded project. We're expecting to roll approximately $2 million into unrestricted fund balance. Last year's fund balance was approximately $1.9 million in total. And again, about a third of that fund balance is ARPA transfer one time. So we're continuing to monitor those, and as part of our rate study, right, we're increasing water rates to get the water sewer fund back in a much healthier position. In stormwater, we added an additional $100,000 in revenue for fiscal year '26, as I mentioned, to stay in line with what we're seeing on the revenue and expense side. We're expecting to roll $300,000 into fund balance, which will bring total fund balance to about approximately $2.1 million in the stormwater fund. Any questions on stormwater? And I'd like to do a prior year revenue comparison and expense comparison of where we were standing last year. The big noted difference here over prior year was in the water sewer fund. Last year, revenues in the water sewer fund came in $985,000 under expenditures, resulting in a net operating loss in which we needed to appropriate fund balance to balance that budget. In 2025, which was the first year of the new rate study, revenue is approximately $1.2 million over expenditures, creating a surplus to increase net position, which was one of the targets and goals from our budget retreats, not just in 2024, but for 2025 as well. Any questions on this slide? And prior year expense comparison, basically the same percent budget remaining on the expense side. The one difference would be the stormwater fund, and that was due to a fund balance appropriation to complete some projects in the prior year. That's all I have. Any questions? All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, that was the last item on the regular agenda. Miles, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
I have nothing further, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Jason, second by Charlie. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.